Anti-Semitic attacks have been on the rise in the US since Donald Trump's election victory in November, with swastikas and other Nazi imagery appearing in public places. Trump himself was accused of running anti-Semitic ads, retweeting anti-Semitic memes, and appointing an alleged anti-Semite, Steve Bannon, to a top White House role. So, has far-right anti-Semitism been emboldened by Trump's victory? Earlier, I spoke to Chemi Shalev, who was the US editor for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz right up until Election Day, and Hadas Gold, a Jewish-American reporter for Politico, who received online death threats from Trump supporters. I began by asking Chemi Shalev how surprised he is by this new surge in right-wing anti-Semitism.
I think American Jews are very worried about it, and I think perhaps rightly so. It's not so much that this anti-Semitism didn't exist before. It probably did exist, but it was under the radar, and I think what everybody was surprised by the fact that it suddenly exploded into public view for many reasons, among them social media, but also because it seemed that the candidacy of Donald Trump brought forth or emboldened all sorts of anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish groups who nobody had paid attention to anymore. I think the American Jewish community was paying attention more to the left and had sort of assumed wrongly that the issue of anti-Semitism on the right, which, by the way, as everyone knows, that is where historically anti-Semitism has come from, as if it was dormant, if not dead.
And Hadas Gold, you are an American journalist who happens to be Jewish. What was your own direct experience of anti-Semitism during this past presidential campaign? You were targeted, weren't you?
Yeah, me along with several of my colleagues, we were directly targeted, usually via social media or email. Some of my colleagues got actual letters to their personal addresses at home. It was rather frightening. I mean, it's never pleasant to see your face with a bullet hole through it, with a message that says you better move to Israel or else we're going to come and get you. I got several emails. They tended to recycle a lot of the same images, which made it seem that there was quite the community there of, you know, placing your face on top of the bodies of Holocaust victims. It's jarring to see that. These direct threats were something new, and they were almost always directly connected to Donald Trump. They would say, now, whether or not these people are actually Donald Trump supporters or not, they would say, you better be nicer, you better be in support of Donald Trump, or else we're out to get you, you dirty Jew.
And just to be clear, you say this is something new, the threats were new, but taking the whole phenomenon as a whole, you know, we've seen swastikas reappearing, we've seen ads that were run that seem to engage in anti-Semitic tropes. How, just for our global audience, how unprecedented is this as an American political and media phenomenon?
I think that, as Chemi said, we seem to believe that this was all in the past, that in the United States we didn't really have to deal with anti-Semitism anymore, or that those who were anti-Semitic, they were so far on the fringes that it didn't matter. But now we had an election where the KKK and those like them felt emboldened and they felt excited by a candidate finally, because this was a candidate who, while would say in interviews, I disavow, I don't agree with this, he wasn't just taking as far of steps to really denounce them and shut them down. To be sure, I'm sure that Donald Trump and his campaign probably do not want these types of people supporting them all of the time. But the problem was some of their policies, the ways they talked about things, made it seem like they were dog whistles. They weren't overt, but they were, in a way, sending an under-the-radar message saying, this is okay.
You say under the radar. Chemi, you will have seen, like all of us did a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., a rally of far-right white supremacists, the kind of people who call themselves so-called alt-right, doing Heil Trump salutes on camera in Washington, D.C., publicly, proudly. When you see stuff like that, how responsible do you think Donald Trump and his movement, his followers, are for things like that?
Look, first of all, if you want to keep a sense of perspective, in 2008, just a few months before the elections, there was a big gathering of Nazis in Washington where they paraded in Nazi uniforms outside. So the existence of that and of somebody like Richard Spencer is not new. What is new is the sense that, one, these people feel that their time has come, and I think more importantly is that people feel that they are somehow connected to or being sanctioned by people in the administration. Richard Spencer is a person that was lauded in Breitbart.com. Breitbart.com was managed by Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is now going to be the chief strategist in the White House. And so there is this link. It may not be a direct link, but there is a link between all of these far-right movements and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has disavowed, but he's never talked about these far-right groups with the same sort of fire in his belly that he does, say, about the crew of Hamilton or anything. It's always when he gets pushed into it. So he says, all right, I'll disavow.
And Hadas, you write about the media and journalism. When you look at the US media, there's a big debate about the normalization of Donald Trump. What do you do now with a president-elect, soon-to-be president, who has trafficked, as Chemi says, in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, in campaign ads, has appointed people like Steve Bannon of Breitbart accused of anti-Semitic remarks to the White House? How does the media cover someone like that?
It is very difficult, but I think that one thing that everybody should keep in mind is we, have to continue covering him just as we did during the campaign. While, of course, there is a level of respect that comes with being elected president, that doesn't mean that we can't continue covering him with hard stories, investigative stories, and calling things out when we do. Now, we shouldn't go so far as to say Steve Bannon is a Nazi. That's not necessarily true, but we can say, and it might take a few extra words, so maybe the media, who loves to make everything super quick and in 140 characters. The New York Times called him a populist provocateur, which slightly undermines some of the charges against him. Exactly, but he is in a sense a populist provocateur. But
he's also accused, just for the sake of our audience, he's accused by his ex-wife of saying there were too many Jews in their daughter's school. He's run a website that has called American journalists renegade Jew and other phrases. Yes,
and I think what we can say is we can make those references. We can say Steve Bannon, who was running a website that did XYZ, or was accused by his ex-wife of not wanting his daughters to be in school with other Jews. I think that we can say that.
Let me put this point to you. Chemi, you often hear, not just in the context of Donald Trump, but in the context of many politicians who have been accused of either making anti-Semitic remarks or trafficking in anti-Semitism, the defense is often, he can't be anti-Semitic, he's very pro-Israeli, he's an ardent Zionist. How can you say he's anti-Semitic? And that's been made, that defense has been offered in favor of Donald Trump and many other politicians. Is that an argument you buy? Does support for Zionism immunize you against a charge of anti-Semitism?
The fact is that there have been elements in the right wing of the American political scene that have been supportive of Israel, and I would still consider anti-Semitic. And I think when we use the term anti-Semitic in this context, we have to maybe say anti-Semitic towards who? The kind of Jewish people that right-wing anti-Semites in America do not like are American Jews, American Jewish liberals, the people who support all the things that they hate, immigration and immigration reform and separation of church and state and abortions and gay marriage and so on and so forth. They don't necessarily make a link between that and the state of Israel, which does, after all, have a right-wing government right now and which they view as standing up against greater Islam. The same is true, by the way, in Europe. The far-right, there are many far-right parties in Europe that support Israel and see it as a bastion against Islam, and are still anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim. So it's a complex landscape.
But do you think politicians and the media in the US and in other parts of the West, encouraged perhaps by pro-Israel groups, were so focused on the so-called new anti-Semitism on the left and in pro-Palestinian movement that they forgot about, they turned a blind eye, they got complacent about the old anti-Semitism on the right that never went away?
I don't think it was a purposeful thing. I think most people, and including Americans themselves, just didn't think that anti-Semitism on the American right was still going to be a factor. That doesn't negate the fact that, yes, Israel and a lot of the American Jewish establishment have been focusing, their prism has been anti-Semitism on the left, the portrayal of people who support BDS as anti-Semites, the opposition to the state of Israel has been sort of fused with anti-Semitism. And so I think they forgot, they sort of didn't keep their eye on the ball. And a lot of this anti-Semitism was fomenting in social media, but nobody ever thought that it would burst out as it did under Donald Trump.
So are you worried it's going to get worse?
I really hope that it calms down and it doesn't get worse, but I think it will always exist. I think that we're always going to, just like with any minority group, we'll always experience some kind of racism or bigotry or something like that, almost no matter where they are. Almost anybody does. So we'll see what happens in the next 4 years.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you both for joining me on UpFront.